Okay, big news of the day. Majority of Minneapolis City Council commits to dismantling city's police department. We're also hearing around the country in these protests, people talk about defunding the police department. So what does this mean? What are we talking about when we say defund the police department or disband the police department? Because that can be scary to a lot of people who go, what? We're just going to have lawlessness? There's going to be no one enforcing the laws? That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, so when they talk, there's a whole spectrum, right? What does this mean? There's a whole spectrum going on. So each person that you hear talking about defunding or dismantling may have a slightly different idea in mind. So what a number of cities have already pledged to do is defunding. So it's not like they defund down to zero. What they're doing is they're going into the police department's budget and taking a bunch of that money and reallocating it. So I've talked about this with the military, right? And of course, we should have a military, right? But no one ever bats an eye about spending more money on the military. We don't have money to send people to college. We don't have money to take care of our city's infrastructure. And we don't have money for all sorts of social programs that we need. But no one ever complains about money getting spent on the military. And it's really the same idea here for what is essentially the city military, the police, right? So, all sorts of money gets put into police departments. And, sometimes people are sitting around going, wait, we're spending all this money on like decked out Humvees and all sorts of military grade equipment, but our schools are falling apart. What's the deal here? What's going on? So that's basically the idea when people talk about defunding the police departments. What a lot of people are talking about is you cut way back on that spending and you put it into other things that hopefully can also reduce crime before it even happens, right? When you call the police, the crime is already either about to happen or it's happened. But when you take care of these issues ahead of time, when you take society and you take care of things before they become problems, you don't ever get to that point where the police need to be called. So a lot of people are calling for taking a lot of this money that goes to the police department, putting it into schools, putting it into social programs, putting it into homelessness issues so that you don't have the police getting called in the first place. So here in Minneapolis, they're talking about dismantling the city's police department. Now, the mayor doesn't want that. He got booed out of a protest basically for saying, no, I don't think that we should dismantle the police department. They booed him. He had to leave. But there's enough people on the city council who have pledged that this is going to happen that it doesn't matter if the mayor's for it or not, it's going to go through. Now, they've already said it's going to take at least a year, right? If you think about it, there's a lot of things to be undone here for this dismantling of the city's police department. So we want to be careful here. We want to not just have a knee-jerk reaction and panic when someone says they want to dismantle or defund the police department. We want to stop and think about exactly what that means. So when we talked about the defunding, what is the dismantling of the city's police department? Well, it's similar, but kind of a more severe situation. So there's a lot of problems that are baked into the system of police departments, right? And if you want to take a look at this, just go check out Campaign Zero, and they've got, there's 10 different categories right here. And if you click on any of these, there's a big list of exactly what details they're talking about. But we're looking at right now, as people don't really feel like the police are acting as servants, right? They're servants to the community. They're supposed to be serving us the same way teachers are servants to the community. They're serving by educating the community. Police are supposed to be serving the community by keeping us all safe. Well, a large portion of our population doesn't feel like that's what the police are doing. So they should be serving the people. So that's like 2 and 5 up here: community representation, community oversight. If you're truly protecting the people, then let those people have a say in how things are done, right? There's the demilitarization, which we've alluded to, right? Pull back on that. We don't need our police forces to look like little armies, right? We just need them to be able to keep the peace. There's the end for-profit policing, the civil forfeiture, limiting use of force, when it is appropriate to use of force and when it isn't. When you do have to use force, what do you do? What are the appropriate things to do to someone when force has to be applied that hopefully you don't end up using on someone like we've seen in the video where someone is essentially being murdered. Okay, proper training, all sorts of stuff, right? So when you look at it and you actually start reading through all of these, you realize that the problems with policing are so baked into the system that you're going to have a really hard time trying to unwind that and just fix whatever problems there are. You're probably much better off by starting from ground zero and working your way back up. Just rebuild a whole new thing. That way you don't have any of the ancient history, right, which is causing a lot of these problems in the new system. So what would the new system look like? Well, again, that's going to be different for every city, right? Dismantling the police department, defunding the police department doesn't mean the same thing to every city. So if you're in a city that's discussing this, before you have a knee-jerk reaction, go, what? It's just going to be chaos if we don't have police. That's not really what's being discussed here. What's being discussed is basically recreating the whole system in a way that actually benefits society. So while, yes, some money may end up going to schools, some money may end up going to social services, those are areas that's been shown can make sure the crime never happens in the first place. So you take care of, you make sure that everyone has access to a good education. You make sure that everyone has access to the help that a city can give you when people get into trouble and they're feeling like, things are getting bad. Get them help before you get to the point where crime's being committed. So these are the kinds of things that are being discussed, right? So there may be instances where when we're used to calling the police, instead of calling the police, what would happen is some kind of social worker would come out. If you stop and think about it for a minute, you realize right now, whenever anything happens, the police get called, right? Well, the police aren't really trained in handling all these kind of situations really well. Many places where a police officer gets called could actually be handled much better by some type of social worker because they have training in those exact areas, right? So that's one way that it makes sense to dismantle the police department, rebuild it, and say, when we get these types of calls over here, why don't we send out one of these specially trained social workers, and they can probably de-escalate the situation, right? That's something that we've seen not happening in a lot of these situations where, these videos that we're seeing with police had the opportunity to de-escalate, but what they did was escalate, right? So the idea is if we're sending social workers into some of these situations, it's much more likely they're going to de-escalate the situation rather than escalate it to some type of violent situation where someone is getting hurt, right? That's what we want to avoid. So that's the kind of options that are being thrown out when we say get rid of the police department. It's not like there's going to be a void where the police department used to be. What's going to happen is, a void will be created by eliminating the police, but then it'll be filled in with programs that take care of it. And you're probably going to have a police presence in some form. It's not like what are you going to do when a bank is getting robbed? What are you going to do when laws need to be enforced? You're probably going to have some type of police presence, but that police presence could look very different than it does now, so that we don't have a George Floyd type situation, right? That's what people are talking about. So this is a developing situation. It's really hitting the news now because of Minneapolis, but this is the first time it's really being implemented in a major way where it's being taken seriously and apparently going to move forward, right? Apparently some changes are actually going to take place, and this has a likelihood of building. This is the kind of ideas that can catch on, and all of a sudden you see numerous places doing the same thing. So we'll see how this plays out. But what you want to do, what you want to make sure you're doing, when this idea comes up, make sure that you're being open-minded about it. Don't let that fear of, if we get rid of the police, then all of a sudden it's just going to be constant violence everywhere. That's not what anybody wants, right? The goal is to get to a place with less violence. So just hear people out, listen to what they have to say, and then be a part of the situation or be aware of and be involved in these movements to make sure that whatever replaces police departments in the cities that decide to do this, it makes sense, it's logical, and it actually will address the issues that cities need to address. Because we're going to see, I suspect that if we start seeing cities do this, no city is going to do it exactly the same as some other city. They're all going to have a slightly different way of doing this, okay? But no one means just don't enforce laws anymore. No one is saying that, because we know that that leads to a very bad situation. You will still have some type of enforcement arm, but maybe some of the jobs can be loaded off into other people who are better trained in those specific areas. Okay, so hear people out, listen to it. This is probably going, I suspect this is going to start being a big story that's going to spread more and more. So we're probably going to hear more about this, but it's definitely something to tune into. It's an interesting conversation taking place, and I think it's going to be a lot of conversations as these things move forward. So thanks for checking out the video. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can get all the new videos as they become available, and we will see you in the future.